Hi, I'm Lenise Brothers, a registered nutritionist, women's health, hormone, and menstrual cycle coach, and the founder of Eat, Love, Move, a nutrition and well-being practice. This is the Period Story Podcast, where in each episode, I sit down with a guest to talk about their period story. We get behind some of the myths and misconceptions about periods and so much more. Now, on to today's guest. On today's episode, we have Mandy Manners. Mandy is a mindset and recovery coach who coaches women to harness their decision to go sober, to pivot from surviving to thriving in all areas of their lives. She also works to raise awareness and to destigmatize experiences of trauma, mental illness, and substance abuse disorders by telling her story. She's a co-founder of Love Sober, a hub for one-to-one coaching, courses, workshops, and community, and also hosts the Love Sober podcast with Kate Baily, and their first book, which is very exciting, Love Yourself Sober, a self-care guide to alcohol-free living for busy mothers, will be published September this year by Trigger Publishing. So welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I feel really... Yeah, it's a timely conversation, I think, so I'm excited.
So let's start off with a question I ask all of my guests. Tell us a story of your first period.
Well, I got my period quite late. So I think I was 14. I'm pretty sure 14 or 15. I remember it feeling very, very late in comparison to my friends. And I was away from home. I was staying with some friends that I used to go and stay with in the summer in Kent. And it was quite funny because it was kind of that summer of kind of like lots of things happening. I remember having a conversation with my friends beforehand, and they both had their period, and we were talking about sex. And I was like, so if I haven't had my period, granted, I'd never kissed a boy at this point. It's like, if I haven't got my period, and then I can have sex and not get pregnant. And they were like, yeah. And I was like, oh my God, I'm like totally just going to like have all the sex, even though I'd like not kissed a boy. And then I got my period and I was really disappointed. I was like, oh man. And then I kissed a boy, and then I got boobs all in that summer. So I kind of came back to school, and everyone was just like, wow, what happened? You know, that kind of transformation. So I was really excited. I was ready and I wanted it to happen. And then, you know, after I had it, I was like, oh, it's not actually that great after all. So it, you know, it was, I never had any really bad kind of PMT or period pains or anything. I was quite lucky, really. So yeah, that was my first one.
You were away from home for your first period.
Yeah.
How did you know what to do?
Friends. I mean, luckily I was with two friends, and they were sisters, and so they just sorted me out. You know, gave me some pads, and and their mum was quite open, so I talked to her, and so that they just helped me out with it. And I mean, everyone else had their period, so I'd seen everyone, and I'd kind of had sleepovers where people had leaked, and you know, all the trauma of all that. So I kind of just I was pretty well prepared. I mean, I didn't talk to my mum about it. I think being that age, that bit later, I was kind of already shut off to those conversations with my mum. So I remember she kind of asked me once, and I was like, yeah, it's fine. And that was the end of the conversation. So bless her. I mean, I think she would have loved to talk more openly, but I was closed to that conversation, really.
And so how did you having had your first period and gotten the support from your friend's mum, then how did you carry on your education around menstrual health? What did you do?
Well, that was it, to be honest. I mean, I had no sort of education around menstrual health up until, I'd say, I was in my 30s. I mean, I really, you know, I had kind of the basic information from my friends. You know, I read a bit on the back of packets of tampons about, you know, how to use them properly. It was a big shift for me from going from towels to tampons, because I really didn't like sort of external bleeding, and I was really ashamed. And also I had two older brothers so I had that kind of rhetoric within the home of like, oh, it's gross, and like, you know, so I kind of just shut up about it, really, and didn't have any connection with my menstrual blood or anything until I switched to cups when I was kind of in my 30s, and I think that's when I really learned about periods, really.
So what made you make the switch? So you started with towels, and then you went to tampons, and then you switched to a menstrual cup, which even now is still a bit unusual.
Yeah, it was because I had 2 kids, and I just started to kind of feel tampons, and it just didn't feel very nice, and you know, and I was and I had a conversation with a friend. I live in France. I had a conversation with a friend, and she was like, oh, you know, I switched to a cup, and I'd seen them, you know, and been intrigued, but she's really tiny. I mean, she's sort of a size 6, and I was like, what, look, I'm sure it works for you, but like, and she was like, no, I actually have quite heavy periods. So I think that's kind of you know, an assumption we make about people. So she was like, just give it a go. And she gave a really kind of brilliant piece of advice. She was like, just stick with it, because it, you know, it will take about 3 months. And I'm really glad she said that, because at the beginning it was quite kind of messy, and I wouldn't get the position right. And, you know, and there were moments where I thought, oh God, I'm just going to give up with this. But I'm so glad I stuck with it, because, well, I don't pay for any kind of, you know, sanitary pads or anything anymore, and it's good for the environment, and I really like it. And I actually really like that connection with my cycle, and like, you know, I thought I had so much more blood than I actually do, and I probably only have 2 days where I have to kind of change it really regularly. Other than that, like, I can, you know, I change it twice a day or something. So yeah, it's been a great change, and I've actually sort of recommended it to quite a lot of my friends, and I've got sort of 4 friends now that have switched cups, which is great. And this is about, you know, we're having more conversations about it now. So yeah, I definitely recommend it to people, but just, you know, it takes a bit of time and work, you know, to kind of yeah, get it right.
Yeah, it does take time. I've been using a cup for the last probably about 5 years, and I remember when I first started, I was just like, how am I going to do this? This is like, I don't know how this is going to work for me. And then there were lots of accidents, and at one point I was just like, should I switch back to tampons? But using tampons never really sat right with me. And I actually noticed that when I actually properly stopped using tampons and really gave the menstrual cup a go, my periods actually got better, because I used to have really, really painful periods. And I think that, you know, sometimes with the tampons, some of the cotton, they, like, you know, you see it coming out afterwards. And I think that was having a really negative effect on my periods. I mean, this is all me kind of like hypothesizing. I don't know for sure. But yeah, definitely I agree with your advice of just sticking with it, because it can be really life changing. Financially, you're not spending so much money on tampons and pads, and just in terms of changing menstrual health can make a massive difference.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm so glad I did. I mean, it's difficult because my daughter's now 13, so I'm sure maybe we'll talk about this a bit more. But you know, so she's going through that experience, and it's difficult because, I mean, I think she's too young. I mean, I don't know. Do you have any advice for young kind of preteens, sort of that age group? Because I want her to be comfortable, and I want it to be easy. But certainly for me, using towels was the worst, because it was just like, I just didn't enjoy having that kind of exterior blood all the time. So I don't know. I mean, what do you have any advice for young?
Well, I don't have a daughter myself, but if let's think about the other women who've been on the podcast with daughters, and the other women I've spoken to with daughters, it's early, have a conversation early and often, let them be really familiar with what's going on with you, talk to them about your menstrual cup, talk to them about your experience of having a period, but also let them know that about what's normal and what isn't normal. Because what I've seen so far in doing this podcast is that if women have a period that is what they think is normal but isn't actually normal, so really painful periods, really heavy bleeding, then they pass down that idea of normality, quote unquote, to their daughters, and then we perpetuate this cycle of thinking that periods are supposed to be painful, they're supposed to be really kind of like a horror show, and it doesn't have to be that way. So there's a couple of people on the podcast who've come on the podcast who talked about giving their daughters like a little gift to celebrate their first period. Woman, she had a period party for her daughter. So yeah, definitely making starting the education early, and then just making it not a taboo, removing that idea of shame, and just having normal conversations about it, just like you would with any other health issue.
Yeah, it's interesting because we live in France, and her kind of sort of she's doing sex ed at the moment, and it's taken from a very biological point of view. So they've been studying the body and the changes of the body, and part of that is periods. And so she's had about 2 weeks of kind of talking about periods, which she's found very uncomfortable, and the boys are making jokes and that whole thing, and they've even had kind of exams about it, and so she was just like, I don't understand why we have to go into so much detail, and everyone has to talk about it. And I was like, I get it that it's kind of feels embarrassing right now, but you definitely will feel grateful for this information later, and you'll feel grateful that the boys know about it too. So she's a bit like, because it just ties in with that time in your life where you're very self-conscious. So it's like, I get that you're self-conscious, but actually this is all really good learning. I'm just so glad that people are talking about it, more, because there's nothing shameful. And that, I listen, Sharon, London artist, is my friend, so I listened to her episode with you, and that, that thing of kind of that shame of hiding tampons up your sleeve, and that whole thing that we do, it's just like, yeah, enough. It's I wonder, from a kind of feminist point of view, I wonder if there is something tied with that patriarchy of just like, you get to do the thing that we can't do, which is produce life. So we're going to make it this whole shameful thing. I don't know.
I think definitely with younger people, there's less shame because the conversations are more open. You can't speak for everyone, but certainly the women I've spoken to in their 20s, they really left that idea of shame behind, and it is what it is, and so what if someone sees your tampon, or your pad, it's no, why is it a big deal?
Yeah, long may it continue.
Yeah. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how your journey from in drinking alcohol to becoming sober, and what effect that had on your period and the quality of your menstrual health.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. I think, again, there's, the cycles of change within women can be very kind of trigger points for maladaptive behavior with alcohol. So, and there's so little data. The first research was done in the 1990s of, how alcohol affects the women's body, which is just incredible, and